Have you ever been warned not to open a certain door, and then found yourself standing in front of it, your hand trembling just inches from the handle? I have, and I can tell you right now, it wasn't just a door, it was a threshold between the living and the dead, sanity and something far darker. I've been carrying this inside me for 8 months. Every night, I replay that moment, the first time I opened that door. The sound, the smell, the thing that moved. My name is Daniel Hayes. I'm a licensed morgue technician with 9 years of experience. I've worked in trauma centers, emergency hospitals, and coroners' offices. I've prepped thousands of bodies, seen the worst humanity can do to itself, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened. My first day at Briarcliff Asylum. This was supposed to be a clean start, a quiet job, an easy transition from hospital chaos to state work. Instead, I found myself trapped in a nightmare buried beneath a century of secrets. They told me not to open that door, but I did, and now I live with what came out. Briarcliff Asylum stood like a rotting crown on the edge of Whitlow County, cloaked in mist and hemmed in by blackened pine trees that never seemed to sway, no matter how hard the wind blew. Locals didn't talk about it. Hell, most pretended it wasn't there at all. But for the last 130 years, that red brick monolith had held the unwanted, the broken and the forgotten. The day I arrived, the sky was a sick shade of yellow, like bruised parchment stretched too thin. My boots crunched over gravel as I made my way up the cracked walkway, the main building looming like something out of an old war photograph. Wide, symmetrical and dead-eyed. Windows were shuttered, and ivy choked the upper floors like veins on a corpse. Inside, the air was heavy with mildew, chemicals and that subtle undercurrent of something older, something decayed. I met Dr. Calder first, tall, skeletal, always in a gray suit like he was attending a funeral no one else was invited to. He barely spoke above a whisper, said he'd been the facility's medical director for over 30 years. "You'll be working downstairs," he said, not meeting my eye. "The morgue, and the old prep wing. Just temporary until we shift operations to the new annex." He handed me a ring of keys, thick, tarnished things that looked older than I was, and one of them, I noticed, was marked with a small piece of red thread. No label, just thread. I asked what it opened. "Nothing important," he muttered. "Just don't go near the old surgical suite at the end of Ward C." Then he walked away. I was introduced to Marla, the only other tech on shift. Pale, chain-smoking, wore gloves even when she wasn't handling bodies. She didn't offer a handshake, just a cigarette and a warning. "If you hear the buzzer ring from that hall," she said, "you didn't hear anything. You understand?" I laughed, thinking she was joking. She didn't laugh back. That's when I noticed the door, heavy, iron-reinforced, half-sunken into the stone like it had been sealed on purpose. No label, no markings, just the faint outline of an old hospital cross, scorched into the surface. It had the red thread keyhole, and it was already humming. My first shift began at midnight. There's a silence in asylums after dark that feels different from regular hospitals. It's not just quiet, it's expectant, like the walls are holding their breath. The morgue itself was tucked in the lowest level of the west wing, a room carved out of stone, with aged fluorescent lights that flickered in a rhythm that felt too intentional. Everything in there was old but functional. Steel drawers, a rust-flecked autopsy table, and a vent system that groaned like something was crawling through it. Around 2:13 a.m. I started noticing the temperature drop. At first it was just a cold spot near the hallway between the morgue and the unused surgical wing. I figured the heating was uneven. It's an old building, but when I stepped into the prep room, the thermometer on the wall read 38 degrees. The central heating panel claimed it was 68. No windows, no drafts. I stood still, breath fogging in front of me, and then, I swear, I heard something metallic clink in the distance, like surgical tools shifting on a tray. The sound came from behind the door at the end of Ward C, the door with the red thread key. Then came the buzz. It was a loud, abrupt bzzzt, the kind that used to summon orderlies back in the day, except no one had used those systems in decades. The sound came from the old wall panel just outside the sealed suite. The light above the button was flickering red. I turned to Marla. She had gone pale as ash. "It happens sometimes," she said, barely above a whisper. "Ignore it." I asked her why the panel would buzz if the wing was disconnected. She didn't answer. Later that night, as I walked past the surgical suite again, I saw something new. Moisture on the floor. Just a few scattered drops. Dark. I thought maybe it was a leak, but when I touched it, it was warm. Almost sticky. I backed away, and for the first time I felt it. Something was behind that door, pressing its weight against the other side. Not trying to get out, just watching. Waiting. By the end of my third shift, I couldn't let it go. I started looking through the archive room, what used to be the administrative records office back when Briarcliff was still fully operational. Dusty cabinets, old filing shelves, and a digital database that hadn't been updated in over 15 years. I searched for any mentions of Ward C's surgical suite. Nothing. It was like the room didn't officially exist. So I dug deeper into handwritten logs from the 70s. That's when I found something. A faded patient transfer record marked Restricted Wing C. Dated. The file had been tampered with, pages torn, some redacted, but one name remained. Dr. Harlan Finn. There were notes about unorthodox procedures and prefrontal access through conscious states. My stomach turned. These weren't medical notes. They were experiments. I asked Marla about Dr. Finch. She went stiff. "That name doesn't get said here," she muttered. Then, without looking at me, she added, "He didn't believe the dead stayed dead." After that, she wouldn't speak to me for the rest of the shift. Later that night, I returned to the sealed door, key in hand. I didn't unlock it. Not yet. Instead, I listened. There was no sound, but on the wall beside the door, scratched faintly into the paint, was a single phrase: "He keeps them alive, even now." I stumbled back and noticed something else. The floor tiles leading away from the door, all in a straight line, were a slightly darker shade, as if something had been dragged. Not long after, I found an unlabeled box tucked behind one of the old steel coolers. Inside were 6 microcassette tapes. No markings, just dates ranging from 1976 to 1980. I played the first one in the break room's dusty cassette deck. The voice was male, calm, methodical. Test subject 8. Expired at 3:17 a.m. Subject exhibited post-mortem twitching for 47 minutes. Electrical impulses retained in cortical matter. Door sealed. The tape cut to silence. Then static. Then a whisper. Just 2 words, almost inaudible. "He's awake." I barely slept that day. My dreams were filled with sterile lights, and the sound of metal being scraped across metal. But it wasn't just in my head. When I returned to the morgue that evening, the moment I walked into the prep room, I could smell something. Not rot, not formaldehyde, electricity. Like the aftermath of a lightning strike, ozone heavy and sharp. I reviewed more of the tapes, one each hour, trying to make sense of the gibberish. By the third, I realized they weren't just notes. They were rituals. Dr. Finch wasn't studying death. He was trying to undo it. He talked about pulse reinduction, magnetizing residual soul energy, and something he called the threshold phenomenon. Always that same timestamp, 3:17 a.m. That's when I started noticing the clocks in the morgue. Every one of them, analog or digital, would flicker or freeze at 3:17 and reset an hour later. It didn't matter if I replaced the batteries or used a separate circuit. Even my phone glitched at that exact time. Screen going black for exactly 61 seconds. The hallway to Ward C grew colder each night. So cold I could see my breath, even though the thermostat still read 68. And then around 2:55 a.m., the body in drawer 6C began to move. Not violently. Not even dramatically. Just fingers twitching. I thought maybe it was post-mortem reflex, but then the mouth opened. And I swear to God it whispered, Just once. It said don't open it. I slammed the drawer shut and stepped back, my hands shaking. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Marla didn't show. The intercom crackled for 30 seconds straight at 3, and from behind that sealed door, I heard something shift, like a stretcher rolling across stone. By now, the red thread key had become more than just a curiosity. It was pulling at me. Every time I passed that iron door at the end of Ward C, I could feel something pressure in the air, like standing too close to a generator. You could feel it in your teeth. I finally asked Calder directly about the surgical suite. Not casual. I cornered him in the hallway outside the main admin office. He didn't blink, just said some doors stay closed for a reason. Then he turned and walked away, didn't say another word. I spent that night in the morgue trying to ignore the flickering lights, the sudden cold bursts of air, the constant hum from behind that door. I told myself I was just tired, overworked, getting in my own head. Then drawer 4A opened on its own, fully extended. Inside, the cadaver's eyes were open. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the tray of surgical tools that had been placed on the chest. Scalpel retractor, forceps, neatly arranged. I hadn't done it. I hadn't touched that body in 2 days. Shaking, I closed the drawer and backed away. But I made a decision that night. I couldn't keep ignoring it. The tapes, the clocks, the whispering bodies. Something was building. At 3:11 a.m., I returned to the sealed door. Every step down that hallway felt like I was walking underwater. I swear the air was thicker, heavier. My hand trembled as I raised the red thread key. The second the metal touched the lock, I felt a jolt like static but deeper, like it hit the bone. I didn't turn it. Not yet. Instead, I leaned in. And through the door, I heard breathing, not mechanical. Human. At 3:17 a.m., I turned the key. It didn't resist. It didn't groan or stick, or fight back like you'd expect from a door that hadn't been opened in decades. It clicked, smoothly like it had been waiting. When I pulled it open, a wave of stale, warm air hit me in the face. Thick, metallic, with a faint undercurrent of something sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long on a grave. The room beyond was pitch black. I stepped inside, flashlight trembling in my hand. The beam cut through the dark, revealing stainless steel counters, old restraint tables bolted to the floor, jars filled with unknown fluids clouded over by time, and surgical diagrams pinned to the peeling green tile walls. It was like stepping into a time capsule of pain. Everything was too clean. Not dustless cleaned as in recently. The air was still, no insects, no rats, no signs of decay. Then I saw the gurney. It sat dead center under a flickering light, and on it, a body, pale, thin, wrapped in a thin, faded hospital sheet. I moved closer. The sheet was pulled over the face, tucked tightly like a shroud, but there were tubes leading out of the body into machines that weren't plugged into anything. No power cords, no lights, just these strange glass cylinders pulsing with fluid, like they had a life of their own. My gut told me to leave. I reached out and pulled the sheet back. There was no face, not skinless, not mutilated. Just smooth, featureless flesh, where a face should have been like wet porcelain. No mouth, no eyes, but there was movement underneath, as if something inside was shifting. Then it breathed. A slow, wet inhale that fogged the inside of the sheet, and the lights in the room exploded, plunging everything into darkness. I froze. In that pitch-black room I could hear it. The breath, labored and slow, like lungs filled with water. Then the scraping began, something dragging across the tiles, not fast, not frantic, just deliberate. I backed away, heart hammering, my flashlight dead. The door I'd come through was now closed. I didn't remember closing it. My fingers fumbled for the knob, but it was gone, just smooth wall where it had been seconds ago. That's when the whispering started. It came from everywhere at once. Low, indecipherable voices whispering, just under the range of meaning. like a chorus of the dead trying to remember how to speak. Then one voice, clearer than the rest. He made us watch her. Suddenly the gurney in the center of the room scraped forward. 2 feet. I could hear the wheels grind against old blood. And I knew, without seeing it, that the faceless body was sitting up. I pressed against the wall, praying the power would come back. That this was a dream, that anything would break this moment. Then something cold touched my hand, not a breeze, not metal, flesh. I screamed and bolted blind toward where I thought the door had been. My shoulder smashed into something, probably one of the old carts, and I collapsed. As I hit the floor, I saw it, briefly bathed in the emergency red light that flared for just a second. The figure was standing over the gurney now, and behind it, lining the walls, were other rows of motionless, faceless bodies standing upright, heads tilted forward, like dolls waiting to be wound up. I don't remember getting out. One moment I was crawling across that cold, filthy tile in a panic, and the next, I was in the hallway flat on my back. The door to the suite shut tight behind me. The red thread key lay beside me, snapped in half. Marla was standing at the end of the corridor, face pale, cigarette dangling from her lips. She didn't even ask what happened, just said, "You went in, didn't you?" I couldn't speak. My throat was dry, my heart still pounding like a war drum. I nodded. Marla didn't get angry. She didn't scold. She just looked tired. "You need to go home," she said quietly. "You weren't supposed to see that." I demanded answers. What the hell was that room? Who were those bodies? What was watching me? But she just shook her head. "You won't find the answers here. Not in files, not in tapes, and definitely not from Calder. He's one of them." "One of what?" I asked. She looked around, then leaned in close. "There are people who think they can rewrite death. Finch started it, but Calder took it further." I was stunned. "You're saying they're keeping the dead alive?" Marla whispered one final thing before walking away. "They're not dead, not anymore. But they're not alive either. They're wait." That night, I filed a false report, said the surgical suite was locked, nothing out of the ordinary. I knew it was a lie, but I also knew something else. The second I put the truth in writing, I'd vanish like everyone else who'd tried. The door stayed closed after that, but I could still hear the whispers. I couldn't stay away, not even after everything I saw, or what I thought I saw. I kept trying to tell myself it was a stress-induced hallucination, that maybe the morgue chemicals had finally messed with my brain. But that didn't explain the key broken clean in half, or the scratch marks that now lined the inside of my locker, where I kept my uniform. They weren't there before, and they formed a pattern. 4 vertical lines and 1 diagonal, like someone or something was counting. That's when I remembered the tapes. I hadn't listened to the last 2. I dug them out from where I'd hidden them in my apartment freezer. Yeah, I was that paranoid. Tape 5 started like the others. Finch's calm, monotone voice. Subject 12 presented accelerated reanimation post-mortem. External signs include twitching, vocal reflex, and heat return to cranial tissue, marked as incomplete. He still listens. Then came silence. Then a new voice. It wasn't Finch. It was Calder. Younger. Clearer. "We need to move them into stasis. Sooner. The vessel loses integrity after 7 days. Begin containment." Stasis. Containment. This wasn't medical research. This was preservation of something that should have been gone. I switched to the final tape. This one was nearly blank. Just a long stretch of nothing. But right near the end, footsteps. Slow, measured, then a whisper so low I had to turn the volume all the way up. Press the speaker to my ear. It said, "He walked through the gate." The others followed, and then, very softly, "Room 9 is open again." There is no room 9 in the morgue. But there was, once. I checked the oldest blueprints for the asylum, scanned and buried in a digital archive. Ward C used to have 9 rooms. One was sealed off in 1981 after a containment breach. Its original designation, Surgical Suite 9. The one I opened. After that discovery, things spiraled fast. The morgue's central monitoring system, standard cameras, biometric sensors, environmental logs began glitching in very specific ways. Every night at 3:17 a.m., the feed from Surgical Suite 9 would flicker to static. Just that room. Just that time. When I asked maintenance to check it, they looked at me like I was insane. There's no active camera in there, they said. But I had footage, blurry, flickering footage that showed shadows moving across the room. Not walking, dragging. I took a screen capture of one frame and enhanced it. There was a figure in the corner, partially obscured, bald, no face, arms too long, hands inverted like the fingers bent the wrong way. It was standing in the exact place the body had been on the gurney, and it was facing the camera. But the camera didn't exist. I sent the image to a friend of mine, Liz. She's a forensic analyst who owed me a favor. I didn't tell her what it was or where I'd taken it. She replied 5 hours later with one sentence. This isn't a trick of light. Whatever this is, it knows it's being watched. That same night, the buzzer outside Suite 9 went off again. 3 times. Not the standard buzz from before. This time it was long, drawn out, calling. I didn't go back. Not yet. But the door, it wasn't fully closed anymore. The latch hung just loose enough to jiggle when you passed. Something inside wanted out. Or worse, was already out. I finally confronted Calder, cornered him in his office with the tapes. The blueprints, the screenshot, everything. He didn't deny it. Didn't even blink. Why? I asked. Why keep them? What the hell are you doing down there? He stared at me with those hollow, pale eyes, and said something that still echoes in my head. Death is not the end, Daniel. It's just poor wiring. He told me Finch had been brilliant but reckless, that his experiments in post-mortem neural activity had yielded something no one else in the world had captured. Residual memory echoes. Calder believed that consciousness could linger after brain death under the right circumstances. Not ghosts, not spirits. Something in between, something unfinished. He called them revenants. Not zombies, not monsters. Just broken returns. Souls that had been pulled back too far, left without identity, face, or peace. Why the faceless bodies? I asked. Calder smiled, almost tenderly. Because identity dissolves in resurrection. We bring back the vessel, but what comes through isn't always who left. I threatened to go public, to expose everything. He just shrugged. You think anyone will believe the morgue tech with a nervous breakdown over a dead body that twitched? He handed me a file folder before I left. Inside were death certificates, 37 of them, all signed by Calder, all listing cause of death as containment failure. Every single one marked with a small red thread in the corner. They were all from room 9. All since that night, I made the mistake of staying past 3:00 a.m. I'd told myself it was to collect evidence, photographs, recordings, anything I could use to blow this open. But deep down I think I just needed to see it again, to prove to myself it wasn't all in my head. At 3:16 the hallway grew silent, not just quiet, vacuumed, like the air itself was holding its breath. At 3:17, the door to Surgical Suite 9 creaked open on its own. No wind, no force, just that slow, agonizing hinge groan. I raised my camera, and that's when I saw them. Not just the faceless figure from before. There were 4 this time, standing in the doorway, perfectly still, lined up shoulder to shoulder like they were waiting to be led. Their forms were humanoid, but their movements wrong. Subtle, twitching, like marionettes with strings pulled by a drunk hand. One of them tilted its head, and I heard my own name, not spoken. Thought, inside me, Daniel. I dropped the camera and backed away. But the corridor behind me was no longer empty. A 5th figure stood there, closer than the others. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It reached toward my chest, not to hurt me, to give me something. I looked down, In its hand was a photo, black and white, curled at the edges. It was a picture of me, standing in front of Suite 9. Only, I'd never seen it before, and in the picture I wasn't alone. I stumbled backward, nearly slipping on the dropped camera. My hands were shaking as I picked up the photograph, trying to convince myself this was some elaborate prank, some kind of sick joke played by someone with access to records and a twisted sense of humor. But the figure next to me in the photo, it wasn't human. It had my shape, my stance, my build, but no face, just like the others, and the timestamp printed on the back. Tomorrow's date, 3:17 a.m. I ran, didn't stop until I was outside, gasping in the cold night air. My car was the only one in the lot, fogged over like it had been sitting in the dead of winter, though the night was mild. When I got home, I triple-locked my door, sat in silence, lights on, staring at that photo. I tried to call Marla. No answer. Her phone went straight to voicemail. The next day, she didn't show up for work. Neither did Calder. I went to administration. They said Dr. Calder had taken a sudden leave of absence, effective immediately. No forwarding address, no warning. His office, empty, every file, every document, every trace of his time there gone, like he'd never existed. I tried accessing the hospital's internal server. My credentials had been revoked. When I asked IT, they said there was no record of a Daniel Hayes ever being hired. The system had erased me, and then the final blow. I checked the security logs for the morgue entrance from the night before, and saw a single unedited clip. Timestamp 3:17 a.m. In it I stood outside Suite 9, motionless, staring at the camera, and slowly, ever so slowly, smiling. But I don't remember that. I never smiled. I didn't go back after that. I couldn't. Instead, I started piecing together everything I had: recordings, photos, fragments of those tapes. I even reached out to Liz again, but she stopped responding after I sent her the footage of the faceless figure in the hall. Just one last message from her. This isn't digital distortion. This thing is real, and it's aware. Then silence. I searched for Marla. Found nothing. No forwarding address. No employment records. Her apartment was abandoned. Mail piled up. Her cats dead from starvation. She hadn't just left. She'd vanished. I began to wonder if anyone I had worked with had been real at all. Briarcliff's website listed only one medical examiner. And it wasn't Calder. There was no listing for a morgue tech named Daniel Hayes. My employee badge didn't scan anywhere anymore. I tried to contact former patients' families. Nothing. Every lead. Cold. That's when the envelope arrived. No return address. Inside, one object. The other half of the red thread key. Burnt at the tip. The metal blackened like it had been pulled from a fire. Taped to it was a torn note, clearly written in a rush. Protocol 9 failed. They've started moving beyond the walls. On the back of the paper was a map of the hospital's lower levels, drawn by hand, and marked on it. A stairwell no longer listed on any blueprint, with one label: route. The handwriting was Marla's. She had known how deep this went, and now she was either part of it, or trying to stop it from the other side. I followed the map. God help me. I followed it. There was a rusted door behind the old supply room in the west wing. Painted over, sealed shut. I chipped away the layers until I found the handle, wedged it open with a crowbar, and stepped into darkness. The stairwell descended far deeper than any official structure should have gone, maybe 5-6 levels, each landing colder than the last. My flashlight flickered with every step, like the batteries were draining faster the farther I went. At the bottom I found room. The walls were made of stone, ancient, damp, veined with black moss that pulsed faintly under the beam of my light. Medical equipment was stacked against the walls like artifacts in a crypt. A surgical table sat in the center, but no body this time. Instead, there was a mirror. Large, floor to ceiling, cracked in the center. I stepped closer and my reflection did not move. It stared back, then smiled. That same twisted grin from the security footage. I stumbled backward, and the mirror rippled like water. The reflection leaned forward, pressing its palms against the inside of the glass. And then I heard them. All of them. Voices. Hundreds. Screaming, crying, whispering. Some begged for help, some begged to be let out, and some begged to come in. I turned to run, and there, blocking the stairwell, was Calder. His eyes were gone, just black sockets. But he smiled and said only, "We needed a new vessel. Yours is ready." The mirror shattered, and everything went dark. I woke up in my apartment 3 days later. Alone. No wounds. No explanation. Just a voicemail from an unknown number that played nothing but static, and beneath it, if you listen close enough, you can hear my own voice whispering, "He's inside now." I left Whitlow County that night. Never went back to Briarcliff. Never filed a report. What was there to say? The facility was quietly decommissioned 3 months later. The official reason: structural instability, hazardous foundation. They never mentioned the missing staff, never acknowledged Surgical Suite 9. But I know the truth. I carry it. Sometimes at night I catch myself staring into the mirror just a little too long. Not out of vanity, not even paranoia, but curiosity, wondering if that smile's still mine. Because something did come back with me. I feel it move when I sleep, and every night at exactly 3 I wake up without knowing why. I check the mirror, and every time, there's a second reflection, just behind me, not moving, not yet, but it watches, and waits. So if you ever find yourself in an old asylum, and someone tells you not to open a door, don't be like me. Walk away, because sometimes, the dead aren't resting, they're just waiting for an invitation.